2, 1. Order. Well, good morning, colleagues. Welcome to our meeting this morning. We are grateful to Francis Maude, Lord Maude of Horsham, for joining us, who tried, when he was in the Cabinet Office, to do a huge amount of reform and change to the landscape of arm's-length bodies, which is the focus of our deliberations this morning. Francis, we're grateful to you for finding the time to appear before us. And I'm going to turn to the first question, and we will go to Mr. Lamont.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Lord Maude. When are public bodies used, and when should they be used?
Well, there should be a presumption against their use, an arm's length body. I mean, part of the problem with all of this is that the taxonomy, as it tends to be known, is immensely confusing and confused and defies rational explanation. But there should be a presumption that if something is to be done by the state, by national government in some form, it should be done within a government department that is for which a minister is responsible and answerable to Parliament. But that presumption, in the view we took in the coalition government, can be overset if there is, I think there were 3 tests we set. If there's a clear requirement for its operation to be seen to be politically impartial, to be independent of politicians, if it is doing some measurement of something that again requires it to be seen to be clearly independent, and the third one, which currently eludes me, but will no doubt come back.
Thank you. There's a presumption against their use. I mean, obviously there are many public bodies out there. Does the driver for their creation come from ministers or from civil servants? Combination,
really. It's often convenient. And we tend to be incontinent in the way we set these things up. It often is quite casual, and far too little thought is given to it, to the establishment of a new public body. And I mean, there's an inbuilt tendency in frankly all organisations, but particularly public sector organisations, to grow. There is no such thing as steady state. If you're not actively seeking to reduce the size of the state and the size of the organisation, it will grow, and it will never remain the same. And so unless you are rigorously controlling in real time the landscape of these bodies, it will increase, as history vividly demonstrates.
So what is the cause? I mean, obviously in opposition, probably all political parties say they want to cut back on the number of these bodies, and yet when they come into government they fail to do so. What is the cause of that?
Convenience. You want something to be done that you don't want to have to take responsibility for directly. I mean, a whole range of reasons, but it should be resisted.
In terms of governments achieving their political objectives, do you think these bodies help achieve them, or are they obstacles?
It hugely varies, but the point is, if you're a minister in a government and you're trying to make things happen, basically you want to have your hands on the levers, and if you have created an arm's length between you and the lever, well, it depends on the length of the arm, but you're going to make life more difficult for yourself.
Why would any minister sign up to that? If they're losing control, if they're handing over responsibility for policy delivery, why on earth would a minister agree to that?
Well, it can be a way of avoiding responsibility. But you're asking the wrong person, because I'm hostile to setting these things up by and large.
But you should
be asking someone who's set up a lot of these things.
But in terms of your objective when you were in government to try and reduce the numbers, why did that? I mean, do you view that as being a successful period?
It was reasonably successful, but I mean, not nearly. I mean, you make massive compromises and trade-offs along the way. I mean, there were lots of mistakes we made, and one would want to do it very differently another time.
And do you think, for the different departments that are responsible for these bodies, do ministers fully understand what or how they control what the bodies are doing, the ALBs?
A huge variation, but far too few do. And when I did my last review of the civil service, looking at governance and accountability, I had a chapter. The last chapter in the review was on public bodies or arm's length bodies, and one of the conclusions, one of the recommendations I made is that ministers should be, in a consistent way that is consistent across government, should be required to be aware of what ALBs are within their purview, because a lot of ministers aren't. And, then there's a very uneven distribution of ALBs across government. There are some departments which have huge numbers. DCMS, for example, has enormous numbers. Others have relatively few. But there is a massive lack of clarity about the whole thing. The whole thing is shrouded in mist and enigma.
But is that done on purpose? I mean, I remember during my time as a minister and speaking to colleagues who were also ministers, some ministers were told by their private office or the civil servants, you can't touch that. That's something away from us as an arm's length body. And other ministers were told, you are the ministers, you can give direction. Yeah. And there's a massive inconsistency between how they were being told that they could achieve outcomes.
Totally. Well,
surely that's the fundamental failure, that inconsistency in how ministers are being advised.
And the ministers that are being told you can't look at this should bear in mind the most important words ever to be used by a minister, which is show me the chapter and verse. Show me where it says that. Because ministers are often told that they can't do things, which are often lazy assumptions made, often unfounded assertions, often sometimes deliberately misleading.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Just before we leave that, almost turn the clock back a little before 2010. Just refresh us, if you will, what the motivations were and what the aims were. Was it to, by reducing ALBs, increase ministerial power, parliamentary oversight, bolster democratic accountability, or was it a cost-saving initiative? What were the sort of motivating principles? Just had the financial crash in 2008. We're in new territory of a coalition. For some, this was a quite sort of esoteric, almost sort of, second decanter report at the SCR sort of conversation. What were the fundamental motivators?
Primary motivation was around accountability. Secondary was financial. And
do you think there has been, one thinks of sort of the pressures of social media and media pile-ons and things, etc., we are becoming, as a society, more risk-averse, and it's better not to take a decision in case it's the wrong one. Almost the sort of engine for their creation has been revved up, because it creates that degree of separation where a minister on a difficult wicket can say nothing to do with me, Gov.
Yeah.
It was an ALB over which I had no day-to-day control.
Yeah. No, I think there's that's part of it, and it's it's the difference between ministers who like having the job and ministers who like doing the job. And if you like doing the job and making things happen, you want to have access to the levers by and large. And that's
yes.
And in a parliamentary democracy where you expect executive power to be accountable to Parliament, the greater the extent to which that is a reality, the better.
This might be a sort of slightly odd question. I don't mean it to be odd. Is there a danger of these things becoming a sort of test of political virility? I've got more arm's length bodies than you, therefore my department's more important, or my portfolio is more important.
Yeah, I don't think I've noticed that, because I think one of the problems is far too few ministers, I think, really know what the landscape of public bodies is that they have within their ambit. And, you know, it's not very interesting. I mean, there's not a lot of glamour in looking at this. I mean, I'm delighted
This is the grist of the Packak mill.
I haven't counted up how many times I've had the pleasure of giving evidence to this committee and its predecessors, but it will be probably heading into double figures fairly rapidly. And I'm absolutely delighted that you're doing this work. But it won't be headline grabbing. But it is but it is really important.
I have to have Clive Betts in as a guest. That gets all the head. That is an inside joke, Lord Maude, which nobody else will get apart from colleagues around the table. Luke, and then I'm going to bring in Lauren. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And just to pick up that point, through your years of appearances before us, and please do be reassured, we feel it is headline news and it's extremely exciting. What has been your kind of feeling of, I suppose, drift from the questioning, but also what is it? Is there anything that you have felt just needs to be dug into, particularly that hasn't been examined, or that there is a fundamental misunderstanding potentially of how ministers see things and the Cabinet Office sees things compared to, and to be fair, mere parliamentarians who are looking in from the outside? If there was one thing that you would nudge us into scrutinising or investigating further, where would you send us?
Yeah, good question. And I don't think I know the answer. The thing is such a muddle. The landscape is so confused and confusing that, you know, the rational sort of Benthamite would say you should do a kind of proper survey of the whole landscape and create a rational taxonomy where kind of you've got different types of bodies which are ranked according to the length of the arm, if you like. You know, I remember 100 years ago as Financial Secretary to the Treasury being responsible for what was then the Inland Revenue. The Inland Revenue was described as HMRC is today as a non-ministerial department for which a minister is responsible. And so there's kind of huge and peopled by civil servants, and again massive kind of confusion about, you know, which NDPBs are and other agencies are staffed by civil servants, which ones are staffed by people who are categorised not as civil servants. So, you know, I mean, I kind of, you say rational man would say, and woman would say, go for a wholesale sorting out of it. But the reality is that's quite unlikely to happen. But that would be the perfect world where you would establish some order. But the thing I think is you have to start by saying this has to be done on a whole of government basis. A lot of the conclusions I reached in this last review I did of the civil service, where I kind of started off thinking I knew what all the answers were, because I kind of lived and breathed this stuff for over a long time, and was surprised by how much I learned in the course of doing the review that refined and changed my approach. But the key overriding thing is all of this needs to be done on a whole of government basis. That we have government departments here, and the clue is in the name.
All right.
Thank you. talked a little bit earlier about particularly ministerial oversight of arm's length bodies, and we've certainly heard throughout this inquiry evidence of that really varying across departments. I'm wondering, how seriously do you think departments themselves and the civil servants who work there, how seriously do they take oversight of their ALBs?
Well, again, very huge variation, but generally not seriously enough. The oversight is too often, in my experience, delegated to too junior a level, senior people. It's not very interesting, and not very exciting. So, and people get drawn to where there are things going on that stimulate adrenaline, and this by and large doesn't. But it doesn't stop it being really important with real consequences. And so, one of the recommendations I made was that this should be done, that there should be oversight at a more senior level. It should be taken more seriously and done more consistently. There's a woeful lack of consistency.
You mentioned in some of your recommendations around this area that departmental boards aren't really abreast of their arm's length body's performance and also their risk exposure, which is quite important. Are there any cases in your experience where actually that lack of oversight has led to adverse consequences?
No, not that I can think of. I'd have to dredge very deep to try and remember, but it absolutely the case that again some boards, the performance of departmental boards generally is very varied, and we always knew it would be when we set up the system of enhanced departmental boards in 2010 to be chaired by the minister in charge of the department with much more senior non-exec members with much wider, broader experience. We knew it would be very variable, and a big contributor to the variation was how seriously the ministers took it. And you can't ordain that. You can encourage it, but not ordain it. And it should be a consistent item on board agendas. And I think I made a recommendation that every board meeting or periodically that one of the public bodies should actually should come to the departmental board and present itself and for interrogation, as it were.
After you made those recommendations, which all seem very sensible and born out of direct experience, do you get the sense that much has changed?
No. Absolutely nothing, as far as I'm aware.
Do you know why that is?
That's broadly the case with all of my recommendations, which did not surprise me particularly.
Do you know if there was any, thinking back to your time, any particular arm's length body and department that, despite the experience being varied across government, was a really good example of best practice? That if you were somebody in the Cabinet Office, you would be thinking, that's worked really well, we need to work out how we can expand that across Whitehall?
Well, obviously, I think the department that I was in charge of was exemplary in this respect, the Cabinet Office. But to be honest, and I hope it was, we did take appointment very seriously. And we had quite a wide range because we included what was then the Office for Civil Society, so all a number of the lottery type bodies were part of it. So we took it all that pretty seriously. And then we did it pretty well. DCMS, I would say, did it reasonably well. A huge range and quite sensitive ones in the arts and heritage world in particular. But it's hard to be very specific on this because I'm very out of date on all this.
Do you think the Cabinet Office should be doing more to improve this space?
Well, I think that I have strong views about the way the centre of government is set up, and the Cabinet Office is now a very confused entity, and the way our central government is set up is out of kilter with every comparable system of parliamentary democracy with a permanent civil service. We're operating with a kind of relic of a system that is way past its sell-by date. But somewhere at the centre of government, there needs to be this needs to be taken really seriously, and a consistent approach driven across government. But we part of the problem we have, and part of the way in which our system is quite broken at the moment is that the Treasury dogma that says that everything is in the silos, an approach, a sort of theology almost, that is hostile to anything that is done in a cross-government way. And it only occurred to me a long time afterwards, but one of the reasons why in the coalition government we were very successful in driving cost savings across government was that we were able to, because it was a coalition government and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury was a very senior and powerful Lib Dem with his own personal and political authority, who was very on side with what we were seeking to do. He was able to frustrate or circumnavigate the Treasury dogma, which said you can't do things which are cross-cutting, because we made those savings happen across government, including the public bodies reforms, where we can reduce the number of public bodies by 1/3 by a variety of means. But that was done in a very kind of whole of government way, and it's quite unusual to be able to do that.
Thank you. And just a final question from me. To your knowledge, are there any expectations set for new ministers when they come into role around how they will be engaging with and overseeing arm's length bodies?
No, and there should be.
Thank you.
Maude, you mentioned the Treasury there briefly. At a time when there was continued pressure on the public purse, which we don't need to go over, etc., does it surprise you that the Treasury ministers aren't seeing two wins here of saving public money and de facto reducing the size of the state as it manifests itself by taking a more rigorous approach and an overarching approach on reform and reduction and modernisation than, let's say, for example, that they have done hitherto, and that you will clearly have worries and anxieties that the Cabinet Office of itself is capable of doing?
Does it surprise me? Doesn't surprise me, because I've lived with this reality for 15 or more, whatever it is now. I encountered it first when I was a Treasury Minister back in the whenever it was, early 90s. So it doesn't surprise me. I still don't really understand it, though, and it serves the country very badly.
Yes. Is it an argument you've made directly to current iterations of Treasury?
Yes. I mean, I've been consulted by several ministers in the current government. One who asked for advice on how do we make mission government work, and I said, I'm afraid you won't. It's a very good idea, and some other governments have made it work. Why won't you? Because the Treasury won't allow it. Because the Treasury are so hostile to the idea of a cross-cutting budget,
yes,
that you end up mired in the treacle of interdepartmental working groups and mission boards and stuff, where the whole thing, people lose the will to live.
Having been promised sort of new fiscal events that reflected the delivery of the Mission government, it does seem business as usual in that respect. Sam?
Thank you, Chair. I just had a brief follow-up question based on what you were talking about in terms of savings. Because I often find that when public bodies are being discussed about being set up, you sometimes see the argument that they can be more financially efficient than doing the same function within a government department, be it because you can get around civil service pay scales or whatever it is. And then also shutting them down saves money. So how do we marry that up?
Well, I mean, it's all about the individual cases. I mean, one of the things that was the argument when executive agencies were being set up broadly, the idea was kind of developed in the 80s and it was broadly implemented in the 90s. And the case that was being made, which you kind of has some merit, is that that a lot of the operational delivery of public services, government services, is realistically ministers aren't involved in it, and if you create a separate executive agency at some degree of arm's length, then you'll reduce the way in which everything gets kind of ending up where something goes wrong, ends up landing on the minister's desk. And the second advantage that was claimed for it was that they would be allowed to operate outside Treasury pay restraints. Well, dream on, because the second never happened. And the first never really happened either, because it just isn't the reality of how things work in a parliamentary democracy, where when things go badly wrong, ministers eventually always will be held accountable. And so if you're going to be held accountable, you want to have some authority. I mean, the fundamental principle I kind of set out in my review was that accountability and authority should by and large be aligned. And in our system, it isn't, fundamentally isn't. Even a minister is in reality accountable for everything done by any official in their department, and yet their authority over those individuals is seen to be very limited. In fact, one of the things I discovered doing this review was everyone assumes that the power vested by statute in the Minister for the Civil Service, which has always been the Prime Minister, the power to manage the civil service, people assume that power is delegated to civil servants. In fact, it isn't. It's delegated to ministers in charge of departments, but no minister has ever been told that.
They have now.
Thank you. Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Chair. You alluded to this briefly, but in your review you describe arm-length bodies as defying rational explanation. Is that a case, has it got worse since you were a minister, and is it a case of unfinished business, or has it got worse? And the second part to that, from what you've just said, would you describe the machine of government as being too big for anyone to make a significant difference?
Has it got worse? I couldn't really say. I don't think it's got significantly better. And there has been this attempt to impose a new taxonomy on new arm length bodies, and I don't think I'm able to assess how successful that's been. But it still leaves the landscape unbelievably confused and confusing. And is it too big? Well, I mean, I'd say the rational Benthamite approach would be to say we want to kind of, have tabula rasa and put in place, but the work involved in doing that. I mean, you just think about it and you can feel your lifeblood draining away. And so the chances of that happening are very slight. So I think it probably, we are probably in the world of kind of fourth bridge, constant, but it does need constant attention. And one of the things that I'm disappointed by is, we did this big public bodies review in 2010, where we got a lot of things wrong, but we did make an impact, and we did bring things. We either some things concluded they shouldn't be done by the state at all. So, like inland waterways, created the Rivers and Canals Trust, which has been a big success, I think, and some other things like that. Some activities were simply discontinued. Others were brought within the direct ministerial accountability, and it did save a lot of money, quite a lot of money. And so it wasn't. But there were lots of things done wrong, but or could have been done better. The thing that disappoints me, though, is that we put in place this system of triennial reviews. And I was always aware of the risk that these would become perfunctory, which I think they probably did. And now they've been discontinued. They were discontinued under the previous government, which was I think, a mistake. And again, one of those things where I think some stronger central authority would be very important to say, actually, that part of central government which has oversight of this whole landscape, just insist that these are done rigorously, that there is a proper, rigorous process where the right questions are asked and the right answers demanded. And that's just kind of disappeared, which is a shame.
So governments have focused on ALBs that are, officially classified and consolidated information is provided, but not public bodies at large. Is that a mistake to ignore the public bodies, do you think?
I'll say that again.
So when governments have focused on arm's length bodies, they tend to pick the ones that are officially classified, of which the Cabinet Office provides information for, but they don't focus on other public bodies that aren't necessarily just more general.
Okay. So
Yeah.
And the question, it just illustrates the confusion that there is, that none of this is at all neat. And one doesn't want to end up being a slave to sort of bureaucrat administrative tidiness, but there is a benefit in having an orderly landscape where people know what's expected, because the confusion, the lack of consistency, frankly, the lack of consistent management information and financial data around, and performance data around what a lot of these bodies do, reduces the accountability even further.
And last one from me. I don't think anyone in this room would be surprised how you describe the Treasury and their vice-like grip on everything. But with that in mind, does that make ALBs pointless, or does it make ministers outside of HMT pointless?
Well,
both.
Yeah, I'm not against the Treasury having control of things. I consider myself one of nature's Treasury ministers. My concern is that they don't do it very well. They control the wrong things, and they're not interested in some of the things that actually make the difference between. Two functions. Treasury should have two functions. One is controlling public spending and making sure it's spent well, and the second is promoting economic growth, and they're not brilliant at doing either.
So, sorry, I said last time I was light. So what would you do differently with the Treasury?
Well, I would split it. If you look at all the equivalent systems to ours, if you look at Canada, Australia, Ireland, New Zealand's a little bit different, but they're all parliamentary democracies with ministers who are in Parliament and a permanent non-political civil service. And they all have a centre of government that is set up differently from ours. They have a proper Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, so you would have all of the secretariat parts of the Cabinet Office brigaded together with the Prime Minister's office to create a proper strategic centre of government. and then they have a divided finance ministry, and it's confusingly called different things in different places, but you have a kind of senior ministry, which is, in Australia it's the Treasury, in Canada the Finance Ministry, Ireland the Finance Ministry, and that does taxation, it does macroeconomics, it does fiscal, macro-fiscal policy, so would typically certainly control the spending envelope. But you then have something which is much more of a budget ministry. In Australia it's called the Finance Ministry, Canada the Treasury Board, Ireland it's called, I think, something like the Department of Public Expenditure and something else. And what you would do here is you would take out of the Treasury everything that is to do with the management of public expenditure, and put that together with the central cross-cutting functions that we started to create in the Cabinet Office, in the coalition government, so procurement, management of property, digital, so government digital service, all of these things you bring together in what I would call an Office of Budget and Management, or Department of Budget and Management, which you then, I mean, it doesn't guarantee success, but at least it makes it possible, and it isn't possible at the moment.
Thank you, Chair.
I have to say, Lord Maude, whether inadvertently or not, I don't know, but you're making Mr. Taylor's day by singing the praises of a former Lib Dem Chief Secretary responsible for marshalling in what became known as austerity, and now endorsing the Lib Dem approach to breaking up the Treasury into two. So I'm sure the Lib Dems will be sending you a membership application form
and gifts all afternoon.
In due course. But before that happens, let us turn to Peter Lamb.
Just to continue that thought for a moment longer, of course the UK did experiment with that in the 1960s.
No, it didn't.
It
did something completely different.
Well, how would you define that?
So what they did there was they tried to replicate the economic bit, the macroeconomic bit of the Treasury, by creating the Department of Economic Affairs, and the Treasury, with little difficulty, saw that off. And I'm talking about something quite different, something, A, for which there are numerous precedents in other countries. B, you would literally take out of the Treasury this function that is currently in the Treasury, and you would put it somewhere else. I mean, possibly physically somewhere else, although you probably don't need to do that, and put it under a different minister with different powers. And you have to deal with the powers. And there's something I didn't really understand properly when I was in government, and until I did this last review. The Treasury has these huge, kind of intrinsic, sort of inherent power to control public expenditure. The way we drove the cost savings, reducing the running costs of government in the coalition, where we saved cumulatively, adding all the years together, £52 billion from the running costs of government. Not from programmes, not from the front line, from the running costs of government, overhead. We did that by using Treasury powers, and the political reality is that those powers were delegated to me very early on, but the Treasury were convinced that this would only be temporary. It would put a shockwave through the system, is the way they described it. And then it would revert, because I would get bored with doing this. And I didn't get bored. I got quite excited by it. And so we carried on doing it, and with the support of Danny Alexander, who played an absolutely crucial role in this. But no, it's a very different exercise. But you have to have those powers. So you have to take those powers out of the Treasury, the powers to control public spending. We created some real-time spend controls, where on digital, on IT, on property, on spend on marketing and advertising. I would do it much more broadly than that. But where it wasn't sufficient for a department to say, well, this this spending is covered by this budget line, so I'm entitled to do it, we would say, yeah, it may be in your budget line, but it's not a sensible way to do it. A, do you need to buy this number of vehicles? Is this a sensible, if you do need that number of, do you need it at all? Do you need this many of it? If you do need this many, is this a sensible way to do it? Is there a whole of government way of doing this which can save money and make it better? And that was absolutely crucial in driving these savings. Which, including the digital savings, where we went from, in 2010, having the most expensive government IT in the world, with a kind of litany of car crash failures in big government IT projects, to, in 2016, to being ranked by the UN best in the world for e-government. We did that by taking powers to stop bits of government doing the wrong thing, and therefore create a strong incentive for them to collaborate with us at the centre, where we had the ability to help them to do the right thing.
Okay.
So it's a very different thing. People often raise that kind of DEA thing from the 1960s.
You're relocating the powers as opposed to the strategy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. It's not. It isn't. It's absolutely not. It's about implementation. It's about how do you make it happen. In government, the easy bit is working out what to do. That's 10%. The hard bit, 90%, is how the hell do you make it happen? And if you can make it happen, how do you make it stick? How do you stop it regressing? Because there's always a tendency for things to regress.
Turning back to arm's length bodies, much like yourself, the government has indicated you'd like to see a number of arm's length bodies closed, and has already announced several, of course, NHS England being by far the most significant.
That was a good decision.
What sort of challenges do you envisage they're going to face trying to head in this direction?
Well, look, I mean, there are typically 4 reasons why reform programs fail or get pushed off track. One is political pushback. Second is vested interest resistance. Third is inertia. And the fourth is lack of technical capability. So no plan, as we know, survives first contact with reality. You come across the first unforeseen difficulty, and you need then to have the technical capability to work out what's the answer. How do you kind of solve that unforeseen problem that's arisen? And so there'll be some combination of all of those factors. One of the mistakes we made with our reform program was the bill we needed to give us powers to do this quickly, because so many of the existence of these public bodies is in primary legislation, and your head swam with the idea of trying to get all of these things through primary legislation. So we created the Public Bodies Bill, which gave us some kind of Henry VIII-ish powers to change primary legislation by secondary legislation. And the mistake we made was to think, or the business managers made, was to think that this would be relatively uncontroversial, and we therefore introduced it in the House of Lords. It would have been, I think, relatively uncontroversial in the House of Commons, as indeed it was when it eventually got there. But it was not at all uncontroversial in the House of Lords. And if I try and recollect that time, the number of eminent folk in the House of Lords who would say, well, of course, Francis, I totally agree with what you're doing in principle. You can't possibly mean it to apply to this particular public body, of which I happen to be chairman. That was an important bit of learning for the future.
So that would suggest that you need a fairly long sort of period of preparation before you can kick off this process of trying to rationalise arm's length bodies.
Well, I'm generally in favour of what we loosely came to call the JFDI school of government. Just do it, find things you can do, and get on and do it, and create momentum. And there are things you can do without needing. So the fact that you shouldn't wait till you've got a complete, perfect plan before doing anything. find some things that can be done relatively uncontroversially and do it, and the demonstration effect. People often in government, and I now work with a number of other governments around the world, and and there's often a lack of confidence that you can do this because it's hard. And so, actually, this was really important with the whole cost-saving program we put through in the coalition government, was the demonstration effect, finding some things you could do quickly, and showing. The thing we particularly did early on was renegotiating big contracts with the government's major suppliers once we found out who they were, because there was no central data on this. We renegotiated contracts. We made big savings, £800 million worth of cash savings in the first short financial year when the government was formed. And that gave people inside government confidence that you can do things. So what my advice would be, don't wait till you've got the perfect plan. Find some things you can do. So you need to be doing the short-term things while actually giving thought at the same time to what's the longer-term plan.
I mean, given your experience, would you suggest they use Henry VIII powers again, and would the existing legislation enable them to do that?
I answer to the first one, yes, because I think otherwise it's just you're never going to get time in the parliamentary, timetable, the legislative timetable for enough to make a big difference. And I'm not close enough now to know how much scope there is, but it was meant to provide a mechanism for continuing activities, so that if the triennial reviews came up with a decision to make changes, but I think we ended up having to specify in some schedule to the bill a list of all of the public bodies to which it applied, and that might need to be amended.
Right. During the reform programme, do you think the process of closing and merging public bodies was handled sufficiently well?
I'm sure it could have been done better. Is life perfect? No.
I mean, given your view, is that there's sort of an aberration? You said that within the restraints you're operating, you were able to resolve as many of these as you felt able to resolve, which, looking through the list, would suggest around about a quarter were permanently shut down, the rest were merged or retained in some other form. How much further would you have ideally gone?
Yes, as I say, I think we reduced the number by about a third. I think you could have gone, but I didn't see that as being the end of the programme. That was kind of the first cut, as it were, but that should have continued, because the rule does apply. If you're not trying to make the number smaller, it will get bigger, and so you need to do this constantly, which is what the triennial review programme was meant to deliver. But it has to be done. It has to be done rigorously.
I mean, while the triennial reviews are gone, you're still supposed to have a tailored review for each arms length body within each parliamentary session, which I suppose, given how short some of them have been, hasn't necessarily happened. But since you're independent reporter, another sort of 3 years has passed. I mean, are they starting to live up to any kind of expectation you had for triennial reviews, the new tailored reviews?
Not aware of it,
no.
But I don't follow it as closely as I probably ought to.
It's been argued that specialist agencies often have better knowledge of their policy area than their sponsor department. Has this been your observation? And if so, how could that knowledge be retained while we do away with some of these structures?
Well, it depends what you do with it. If and in some cases that's definitely the case. But one of the problems with today's civil service is that there is a shortage of that kind of detailed, deep knowledge, subject matter knowledge within departments. and I was a sad person that I am. I was rereading recently the early part of the Fulton Committee report from 1968, and the critique, the 6 critiques Fulton made of the ways in which the civil service of the day was not set up to be effective for the needs of the day. And they're pretty much all criticisms that remain today. And one of them is the cult of the generalist, or what they call the gifted amateur, the churn, random movement from one to another, job to another, which perpetuates the generalist thing, because if you're moving all the time, then you're losing that deep knowledge. And some people in the civil service will say not only are these critiques still live, actually in many cases they've got worse. So we absolutely do need to find ways of improving the consistent, deep subject matter knowledge that exists within the government. I mean, it matters a bit less where it sits, whether it's in a department or in a specialist agency, and that there will be, for sure, cases where you need to have that knowledge and expertise located in an agency rather than inside a department. So I would say where it is a bit second order. The first priority is that you have it and you cultivate it and you nurture it, and we're not brilliant at doing that.
I mean, the point about the Fulton report has been made at a recent committee meeting by someone else. In terms of those specialisms, then, I mean, there was an observation that's been made by former ministers, a number of sort of recently former ministers, that in various occasions, and I think it's been alluded to earlier in part of this session, you have circumstances where agencies appear to believe that they are the master in terms of areas of policy, rather than the servant of the ministers. Has that been your observation? And if so, what could be done about it?
Well, I mean, policy should be being made by ministers, with very rare exceptions, and I can't actually think of any exceptions at the moment. Policy is for politicians, accountable to Parliament and to the public. So I think there should be very few exceptions to that. But again, there's a lack of consistency, a lack of anything approaching sort of being able to kind of compare, to benchmark what's being done in one place against another, because there's so much variation.
I think the last question for me. The reform programme was justified in terms of reducing waste and also addressing accountability issues. Do you think there's a trade-off between those two different areas?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we... I think if we improved accountability by bringing something that did need to be done by the state inside a department, then there's nothing to say that necessarily made it less efficient. In fact, it should, because you should be merging the oversight in the department, the governance function in the department, with the actual activity. So I can't think of a way in which there would be a trade-off between the two.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Should we be concerned, as arms length bodies realise that politicians and others and think tanks, etc., are looking at them, asking questions about them, etc.? They've obviously matured and aged since the time of the coalition. Quite a lot of them now seem to be very adept at promoting themselves and their absolute necessity to the running of the British state. They have communications teams and promotion people and all the rest of it. How concerned should we be that in essence there's a rearguard action being fought amongst the coterie of arm's length bodies of you can't possibly get rid of us, you can't possibly reform us or change us, we are just too vital and too embedded.
Well, to the extent that's happening, you should be pretty concerned. I mean, I've often been astonished to hear stories of public bodies employing government relations companies, advisors.
Yeah, they are.
I mean,
lobby government on policy.
I guess it's kind of weird and a bit inappropriate, really.
You would think that should stop?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so.
Taylor?
Thank you, Chair. Much of my question had been kind of covered, and we've had actually a very interesting debate or question session. So the basis of the question is about how different governments at different times have either abolished or established ALBs to broadly achieve very similar stated aims. Can you give some examples of where you had success during the coalition period, broadly achieving similar aims by doing one and the other, and maybe referring back, and I think it was an interesting discussion around the taxonomy, the structure, the kind of the entire piece about how there may well be gaps that need to be filled, there may be conflicts between ALBs, there may be duplication, and how that lack of a real roadmap or a proper atlas of the space means that there is that creep of scope and potential conflict, and how that might be the driver behind rationalising some of these scopes between various ALBs.
Yeah. So the trade-off between what were the two things you're talking about? The trade-off,
the abolition and the creation of, to largely achieve the same aims in different cases and examples.
Saving money,
or providing better services, or I don't know, but there's any examples that you can give.
No, not really. So it's all quite a long time ago, my direct involvement. I mean, at the end of a lot of this is just about good governance. It's about working out, having some principles and some presumptions you apply. So should it be? Does this need to be done at all? If it does need to be done, does it need to be done by the state? If it does need to be done by the state, is there any reason why it shouldn't be done by a minister answerable to Parliament? Does it need to be done to this extent? I mean, we should be asking these kind of questions about everything that the state does, and consistently. I mean, I realised at the end of my time in government that I wasn't really a conservative in the conventional sense, in that I found that every status quo was a living affront that needs to be.
Well, sounding remarkably like Keith Joseph.
Absolutely. But you need to be. There's still too much in the public sector, a sense that we'll try and get this right and then keep it going. And no, that world doesn't exist anymore. The world of steady state management, business as usual, doesn't exist. It's either getting better or it's getting worse. And if you're not trying to make it better and trying to make it more efficient and cost less and deliver a better sort of outcome, then it will be getting worse.
You mentioned earlier other, in relation to cleaving the Treasury, other jurisdictions, and just sort of picking up on your answer to Mr. Taylor there, where a mature, very mature, building up layers of silt, if you will, sort of democracy, And sometimes it needs a jolly good dredge to get back to the
Yeah.
riverbed and first principles. Do you see that as just the antiquity of the British state? Do you just sort of see that as a basic impediment to look at in a radical, modern, contemporary way? And can you point us to any jurisdictions elsewhere that have been in similar circumstances and have dealt with these issues in a more focused, energetic, and then ultimately successful way?
I don't think the antiquity is a barrier to it. Actually, in some ways, the fact that we don't have a written constitution and that we have so much of what you can do in government is not laid down in statute and or obviously not in a formal constitution, actually gives you more freedom to do things. But you do need to be constantly using those important words, show me the chapter and verse, show me where it says I can't do this. And the mistake most ministers make is to underestimate the powers they have to make a difference. The exception to that is the power of the Treasury, which is huge, and which is often used to limit the scope for reform and radical change. And it was interesting that the terms of reference for this review explicitly excluded. I've got it here somewhere. The ability of my ability to look at the way in which public expenditure, the governance and accountability for public expenditure. So I obviously ignored that and commented on the absurdity of a terms of reference for a review of governance and accountability, which said that the only body that is deemed suitable to review governance and accountability of public expenditure is the body that does it at the moment. You only need to express it to see the absurdity. And so if there's something about us that makes us different, I would say it's that. Okay. That's a big blocker.
Okay, and let me just ask you this question before I bring in Mr. Carling. The elected practice of politics seems to be getting younger in profile and less experienced in real-world management of companies and organisations, etc. Somebody gets the call from the chief or the prime minister, we want you to go and be a minister in this department, and you get frightfully excited and off you trot. You're inducted by civil servants who clearly will want to house train you in the general view of the department. In terms of trying to drive these sorts of very major systemic change agendas forward, we don't do enough, do we, correct me if you think I'm wrong, in preparing politicians to be ministers, to feel empowered to ask those, or to know to ask those questions of show me chapter and verse, tell me where my remits are, tell me where the boundaries are, etc. You get dumped in on day one, start doing your stuff, no time to breathe and think.
No, you're not wrong at all. You're totally right.
How do we address that from a political point of view? I mean, there's talks about, civil service colleges and so on and so forth to prepare the top flight of civil servants. We don't do it on the political side.
No, we don't. And we should. I had a chapter on this, actually. And it's kind of was outside my terms of reference, but I thought actually I think it is really important. And we should. There are various things. I mean, I think we should do it quite formally. I mean, not everyone who comes into House of Commons wants to be a minister, but those that do, and that's probably at least half, I would say, we should have a proper programme for them and prepare them. I learnt about being a minister when I was a PPS. I was PPS to a very busy workaholic minister who simply said, you've got access to my diary, come to any meeting you want, see any papers you want. So I kind of was like an apprentice, and that was fantastic. Very few do that, but that's one way of doing it. But I think we can do it much more formally, and I highly recommend that. I mean, when I was leading the work on preparing the Conservative Party for government in the period before the 2010 election, we kept hearing back from Whitehall that what would be really helpful is if incoming ministers could tell us what their working style is. And I thought, well, that's a really good idea, but I had no idea how you set about that, because we all think that our own working style is completely normal. I mean, I couldn't tell you what my working style is, but obviously it's totally normal. But everyone's working style is different.
It's certainly not to keep to your terms of reference.
But you should. But it's perfectly possible to go through a process where people, some of the problems that have arisen in the last government around ministerial behaviour was simply a lack of self-awareness, and proper. And being self-aware is sometimes uncomfortable, but really important. And you can help people with this. People often don't know what effect their behaviour has on the people around them. And some of the problems you get with civil servants feeling that they're not able to speak truth unto power, in that rather annoying phrase, is that ministers haven't known how to interact well with officials, not to understand what that relationship can be and what it should be, and then too often on the other side, officials haven't been properly trained in how do you present advice that you think may not be welcome to the minister, but how do you do that in a way that's not going to massively damage the relationship? There are ways of doing these things, but they're not easy, and a lot of it is about self-awareness on both sides, and that preparation I think is crucial. I used to do, on a very informal basis, in the coalition government, I used to do an induction session for new ministers after a reshuffle, because otherwise, as you say, all of the induction would have been done by civil servants, which might not have been wholly conducive to effective government.
John Lamont and then Sam. John.
Lord Maude, one thing I think you missed out during that last exchange was surely the onus rests with the Prime Minister to make sure the people that he or she appoints have the skills to be ministers.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I make this point in the chapter I did on ministers. You're always going to have in any appointment process, there's always a bit of kind of party management involved, and that's just part of life. But there should be, you're totally 100% right, and I do absolutely make that point. So I've got here. Many ministers are appointed with scant regard to their background, knowledge, and skill sets. The requirements of party management will always be a factor. No point trying to eradicate, but far more care should be taken, especially in the appointment of junior ministers, to ensure that there is a good fit between the individual and the role.
My experience certainly was ministers were appointed based on who had backed who during various leadership elections, as opposed to whether they had the leadership skills or the ability to develop policy, which for me is always going to end in disaster.
Or I went wrong as well. Yeah.
And so you're never going to totally get rid of that, because promotion and status is a currency in the political world. So you're never going to but far more attention should be paid to making to the fit.
Thanks.
And the preparation, people being prepared and being willing to submit themselves to what can sometimes be uncomfortable. I used to get partly to set an example, which was not particularly effective. I used to submit myself once a year to a 360 review, which was run by the Institute for Government, who offered this to others. And that's very effective, because there are things all of us do, particularly when you're busy and you've got a lot going on. There are things you do which have an effect that no one's told you about, but finding a way to bring that just makes it work better.
Carly.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up on that before I ask on a different subject, talking about how a Prime Minister can make sure that the people they're appointing as junior ministers have the right skill set. Obviously, Prime Ministers are very busy people. They don't necessarily have the time to conduct really thorough assessments of that.
But that's what the whip should be doing.
Sure, yeah, that was going to be my question.
Yeah.
Where do you think that best fits, and how can that be ensured?
Well, it has to be done somewhere, and the whips the whips office is probably the place to do it. But you need some professional help. We shouldn't be doing this in the kind of amateur way that we do. If we do it at all, we do it in a pretty amateur way. There are plenty of people around who do this for a living, and it's not rocket science.
That's really helpful. So just to move back to public bodies reform more broadly, the public bodies reform programme that your government led obviously would have required sustained engagement and buy-in from government from across government for a long time. How did you create that sustained engagement and buy-in, and how was that structured and resourced at the centre of government?
The first part, how do you get the buy-in? Well, I mean, it's mixed and wasn't universal. And there's plenty of resistance and plenty of kind of wrangling with colleagues about particular things, and you end up kind of, I'm not going to fight about that. So you do end up, it's not a perfect process. The buy-in was not, to the concept. This is the kind of thing where, of course, I totally agree with the principle and the approach, but you can't possibly mean this, because that's going to be quite uncomfortable for me in the conversations I have to have. Buy-in, both parties in the coalition were committed to this. I can't actually remember whether the Lib Dems did have a commitment to it, but most parties go into an election saying they're going to do this. So just the Lib Dems didn't expect to have to make good on it. But so how did we set it up? We had a very good, quite small team in the Cabinet Office who ran the programme. And they were very good, and full credit to them. And it was not, it was not a kind of high, it was not seen as a sort of, this is your route to the top kind of activity, but they were, and not good for kind of making friends among senior officials elsewhere in the system. So full credit to them that they were committed and did brilliant work on this. We had a Prime Minister and a Deputy Prime Minister who showed a commitment to this. So people didn't really feel they had anywhere at the end of it. That there was not really anywhere for them to go.
And how big was the Treasury's role in kind of driving the agenda forward? How
interesting. I can't really remember, to be honest. It was very much driven by us. The Treasury, I don't remember the Treasury being difficult about it, which is something you won't often hear me say. So I think, no, that was not, I don't remember how they were involved, to be honest.
No, that's fair enough. And just finally, the sense that we've gotten of the ongoing review programme under the current government is that they are primarily asking departments to
look at kind of the way their public bodies are working and do it on that basis rather than having a particularly strong central drive on it, though I'm sure that is happening as well. Do you think that approach of really asking departments to take the lead on reviewing their own public bodies works?
Well, you need to have the ability. What the centre needs to be able to do is to challenge and interrogate, and to do that really effectively. And I don't know whether they're set up to do that. And ministers need to be involved in that. I mean, very actively involved. I mean, I had the advantage that I was quite senior and I'd been around a long time. And I was also kind of at the end of my career, so I didn't mind who I irritated. And that's an advantage too.
Thank you. I mean, do you see that as a sort of... I know you sort of said that sort of slightly almost tongue-in-cheek, but you've just mentioned the very small team that you had in the Cabinet Office leading this. And then you pointed out that, you know, they didn't make friends within the system because they were chopping things away, etc. Is there merit in sort of just creating a small team of the sort of senior experience moving towards the end of whether it's a political or a civil service, where that really just doesn't matter because they don't need the approbation of others for future promotion and so on and so forth? So it's not size, it's more to do with sort of age, experience and attitude.
No, I think that's a good point, actually. I think there's a lot of merit in that.
Okay. You need
I wish I'd thought of that.
You need a cabal of the wise people.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
May I just say, young people can also be very keen on condensing public bodies.
They can. They're not at there, but they... no, of course they can. Yes, one mustn't be ageist.
Oh.
But there we are. No, thank you, Sam, as the youngest member of the committee, and we're grateful to you for speaking up for the youth. Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit, throughout this inquiry at times, it's sometimes felt a bit hypothetical to kind of explore it from a very, we start with the landscape. We've often not drilled down, and I feel like right now we've got someone sitting here who has, actually looked in some of that detail. Now, I know that the ambition of the government that you were a minister within looking at this was much bigger than what was achieved. I'm going to guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that perhaps there was some low-hanging fruit, arm's length bodies where the organisations had structures that meant it was going to be it was going to be quicker. Are there any that you didn't get to that you could tell us about, and are there any features of those organisations that you could tell us about which may be useful to people approaching that task now?
Yeah, I should have anticipated that question, and I can't, on the spur of the moment, I can't think of them. I mean, partly you kind of blank out them, and I'm not very good at looking back and over these things. I mean, people used to say, well, you wanted to have a bonfire of the quangos, but they're not a phrase that I can remember I ever used, because that kind of raises expectations, and it makes it kind of it makes it all more tabloid than this was meant to be a serious exercise, largely focused around, as I said at the outset, around increasing accountability. Which had the collateral benefit of saving money as well.
Can I ask, earlier on the issue of pay did come up, and I understand that one of the allures of creating an arm's length body that carries functions that may be carried elsewhere is the ability to kind of go outside of that civil service pay structure. To what extent was that an impediment to taking functions back in-house? Have you any recollection of that?
I don't know. I don't. And I mean, at the end of it, if you could show that that overall it was saving money, then I think it was possible to be reasonably pragmatic about it.
One of the issues, isn't it, that arm's length bodies are perhaps paying closer to market wages, especially where the arm's length bodies are carrying out technical functions.
Yeah.
So I just wondered if there was any sense that perhaps that was making it difficult to bring people back in-house.
To be honest, I don't remember that. I mean, I can see how it could be an issue, but I don't remember whether the extent to which that was an issue, or indeed how it was resolved, other than people being sensible and pragmatic.
One more question,
Yeah, sure.
Chair, and I guess I think it's a different approach. I think throughout this, there's been a consensus that people want to see a kind of a reduction in wasteful arm's length bodies and more accountability. But there are some arm's length bodies that perhaps have been set up for a more wholesome purpose, which is that they carry out some function where independence from political decision makers is a considered virtue, are considered virtues, and it protects the integrity of the work that they do. To that end, how resilient do you think our arm's length bodies are to political interference? You've said a lot about, I think it was kind of a get it done approach to government. As we enter the world of political populism, left and right, how resilient do you think our arm's length bodies would be to a populist government?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, it's all in the circumstances. I mean, where it is accepted that the function needs to be, like, National Office of National Statistics is a clear example of something that needs ministers not to be able to interfere, there are no absolute guarantees, and ministers may try to interfere beyond what is appropriate. But again, it's about clarity about what are your powers, what is legitimate for you to be involved with, and so getting that how robust they are will depend on the people.
Is there something that can be done to strengthen their independence, to move them further away from political control?
Well, it depends. Again, it's some of them shouldn't be. It should be less immune from political control. But that's totally about that's about when I talk about the kind of the confusion of the landscape, and with kind of labels attached to different long-standing bodies which don't reflect the reality. I think you need to have a way of describing these things where the principal differentiating factor is the length of the arm. How remote from ministerial control should it be? Should this be, and for what purposes should this activity be accountable through a minister to Parliament? But it's the lack of clarity that I think creates the problem. So sometimes things should be absolutely kind of removed from any semblance of ministerial interference. But clarity and transparency are the key.
Thank you. Joe.
Lord Moore, thank you very much indeed for taking our questions this morning. Order.